Here is a pink ink by Montblanc Ladies Edition Pearl. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. The paper I'm using here is a Maruman Mnemosyne Notebook. It should be obvious with the very short video time. This ink is dreadful. For me, there may be someone that wants a pale, flat pink that is hard to read. I'm hoping it's easier to read on the camera. And I'll be honest, after it dries, it does get a little bit easier to read, but boy, this is a tough one. The pen for today is a Cross Bailey. All of the writing samples are done with a Platinum 3776 with a soft fine nib which writes rather dry, a Hero 7035 with a fine nib that writes wet, a Visconti Van Gogh with a medium nib and an average flow, a Lamy Safari with a broad nib that writes average. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there, starting with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the dreadful soft fine, it is very light with no feathering, with no spread. It does shade some, I guess, when you look at should, if you can find it on the third line. The H is a little darker and so is the D, so I guess it does shade some. Looking at the wet fine nib, it is quite a bit darker than it was with the soft fine, thankfully, and it's generally readable. We get no feathering, we get no spread, we do get some shading. You see it on the B of bears is much darker than the rest of the word, and the end of the S starts to get much darker. In dancing, the up and down stroke of the D is quite a bit darker than the rest of the word. I'm probably pointing out the only parts that are, no, not really for this. This is much easier to see. Looking at the medium nib, it is just a tad bit darker than it was with the soft fine, lighter than it was with the wet fine. We get no feathering, we get no spread, we do get some kind of shading. I think you can see why this is the only writing sample for this. I really struggled using this for the day. As far as shading, we do see a little bit, kind of. Look at there's two of them. First and second line directly above and below each other, where the T starts lighter and it gets darker at the he. Same with direction underneath that. It starts lighter and starts to get darker towards the N at the end, but not really much for shading and a lot for disappointment. Looking at the stub nib, it is the same tone stub broad. Looking at the broad nib, it is the same tone as the medium. No feathering, no spread. I think the shading here shows up much better. Look at followed on the second line, where it's a nice mid-tone on the F, lightens up on the O. The L's are darker on the bottom, and the one is so light on the top it kind of disappeared. During the O, it transitions from a light to a dark to a so light you can hardly see the end of the O-W-E, but the D starts to get darker again to where you can see it, so at least you can kind of guess what the word is. Looking at the back of the page, with no great surprise, there is no bleeding and no ghosting. Like most inks, this one comes in a bottle. This is how the Pilot Custom 823 fits. And here is the Pelican M1000. Here is the ink level when you can no longer fill a Lamy Safari. There is approximately 7 milliliters of ink left. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting it into water. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right,
1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is
Caran d'Ache Divine Pink.
Here is
Diamine Pink.
Here is
Lamy Vibrant Pink.
Here is
Sailor Kobe number 30.
While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page.
Here is a purple ink by J.R.R. Coco do Brasil.
Here is
A black ink by Monteverde Midnight Black.
Here is
a brown ink by Diamine Ochre.
Here is
a gray ink by Diatramentis Fog Gray.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? The paper I'm using here is yellow Rhodia paper.
The extra fine, medium, and broad seem fairly hard to read. The broad was the best of them. It was the wet fine that had the only really usable tone to me. So there isn't much choice. You have to go for the wet fine if you must use this. Otherwise, rub Montblanc's nose in this mess they made and say, no. No, Montblanc. No.
I hope you got something out of this video, and if you're not subscribed, I would invite you to do so now.